While most girls her age were reading 17 magazine, Stephanie had subscription to Forbes magazine, and today she's leading a seven-figure company, a commercial real estate brokerage, and she also happens to be my older sister. Welcome back to the Mark Faris Experience. I'm your host, Mark Faris. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Mark.
Yeah,
It's an
well,
honor, actually.
well, older sister, and you run your own business there as well, and we're both in real estate, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and give the listeners a little bit more context, a little bit more on our background, and how we both got into, how you got into real estate, and our stories. They do cross at a certain point as well, which we'll be jumping into as well. But why don't we go back and share a little bit of your backstory there, and then we'll see where the conversation goes.
So we grew up on this farm. You, me, six, seven, five other brothers, and two sisters, all in one happy farm. But my love of business probably became alive when I heard Dad and Mom talking about payback period when they were looking at buying 10,000 more chickens. And so I was asking all kinds of questions about what's investment, how does that work? How do you know when you're doing a good job? And I was in grade 5. So that was a bit of a seed that was planted. But I would say the next step that I remember was, getting my driver's license, driving around subdivisions, looking at real estate. I just sort of had an appreciation for houses, and that was the next sense of any kind of business that I was aware of. I liked the job that I had. I was good at selling. I worked at several retail places, but then I finished high school and didn't really know what I wanted to study, so I went to go to work at Air Canada. And the prospect of traveling all over the world is really exciting. But what I ran into there at the airport was a unionized mentality. And very quickly, I was rising in the ranks. Apparently, you're supposed to serve some time doing certain jobs, and I got trained up on them right away. And so some of the 30-year employees were begrudging the fact that these junior people were running around doing the same job as them. And I just loved the responsibility. I'm 19 years old and I'm handling a room full of politicians and businessmen traveling back and forth from Toronto to Montreal and Ottawa. And, this room is full of disgruntled passengers when planes are late and whatnot. And here I am saying, welcome to Air Canada Flight 462 to Ottawa, and, navigating all the passengers. So that was a lot of fun. But the challenge that I ran into was they also asked me to go into a management position, an outside management role, and I loved it. But then the airport, or the airline, I should say, was going through restructuring. And they took anybody who was on an outside assignment and put them back onto the floor, which was back to, the regular worker mentality. And I was young, but I really hated the idea of being squashed. I just had this drive to do more and to push and do the hard things. I mean, working certain areas of the airlines, which ones are pressure cookers, and I'd always seek out the higher intensity areas, which was, they called it rapid air, the flights going to Montreal and to Ottawa. But in any case, that only lasted for 3 years.
How old were you there at that
So I
point?
got hired when I was 19, and then when I was 22, they went through the layoff process, and it was really just so they had the right to hire people off the street and buy them, bring people back at a lower rate. And so I didn't leave the airline right away, because when you get laid off, you actually have recall rights. And so my husband and I, we got married at that time. So I was 22, and I got into real estate instead. I didn't want to, go back to the airport getting my minimum wage job. I thought I would try something else. You and I had already purchased our own investment property together prior to getting married.
Why don't you share that story before we move on that? Like, you get a phone call from me, like I was 17 at the time, and watch this late
You
night
needed me.
infomercial.
I had the full-time job. You were still playing hockey, you know?
Well,
So
yeah, yeah. It was like you get a phone call. I was like, "Hey, I just saw this thing down in London, Ontario. This two hour event." And then why don't you take it from there? That phone call, and then kind of how everything played out.
yeah, I'm not sure if it was a phone call or walking into the front door in the morning, but anyway, you said, "Well, I stayed
Right.
up. I was
Yeah.
watching late night
Yeah.
TV, and there's this
That's right.
great no money
Yeah.
down investment aspect
Yeah.
proposition." And I had read one of my favorite books, which is Rich Dad Poor Dad. I had read it
Yeah.
by then, and I knew, oh yeah, I want to get into real estate or like some sort of investing. So I said, yeah, let's go. And we drove to Sarnia. It wasn't London, it was
Oh,
even
Sarnia.
further.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And anyway, it was a quick dash to be the first in line to sign up for the program. So we did. Turns out that
The free course turned into $1,000 sign up course, right? That was the
it
pitch
was
at
a,
the end. Yeah.
it was I think it was at $900 to go to the next course.
Yeah.
And then when we
Yeah.
went to that next course, it was $6,000. And, at the end of it all, did we gain the knowledge from them that we needed? I think all it did was it put us into a very focused state that we were actually going to try and apply ourselves. So when the teaching was go and look through the newspapers and circle all the ads for for sale by owners and try and buy your real estate
Motivated,
yourself.
motivated sellers. Yeah.
At the end of the day, we bought a place. We actually had to qualify for it with our mom, and she co-signed for us in the
Yeah.
end. And so we all became partners together. But it was pretty awesome. At 19 and 20 years old, we're buying our first investment together. So I'm very thankful.
So what happened next then, Stephanie? So you're working at Air Canada.
So in moving into the real estate world, as I mentioned before, I was selling I was just shy of Rookie of the Year on 150 broker office. And it got me very competitively moving forward to hustle even more the following year. But I found myself struggling a little bit to not break through that ceiling. And I started to reflect on why I wasn't breaking through. And I realized I still had my recall rights at Air Canada. In the back of my mind, I still had a foot in the door at Air Canada that I could go back there, because the way that the system was back then, you could actually be employed by the airline and sell off all your shifts and not actually show up to work, but you would get all the benefits of that. And so because I had this sort of open loop in the back of my mind, I realized actually I was reading my Bible and I had come across this line that said, "A house divided cannot stand." And I know it's
Mm,
talking about you cannot serve God and mammon, is what the Bible says. But I knew that it applied in my mind to being divided in general. And so I went to the airlines and I said, cut off my recall rights. I don't ever want to come back here. And
mm,
they ended up giving you some sort of like travel pass to give up the recall rights,
mhm.
or they were supposed to. They never actually followed through and did it for me, which is that's a whole other
Yeah.
chapter, which doesn't even really matter.
Yeah.
But the point
Yeah,
is,
you burn the ships there.
yeah,
Yeah.
I had to.
Yeah.
In my mind, I knew I wasn't fully committed. And so
Mm,
once I went and did that, the next year my income I think tripled, because I was fully committed to hustling. And we didn't have kids yet. My husband Blair was still working pretty long days on his job, so I could do 12-hour days no problem and have fruit producing out of that.
So Stephanie, what was it that, I mean, Blair, he's been a phenomenal addition to the family. So you did good with your hubby there with Blair. And I know he's been super supportive through the years, and I know he's working alongside with you right now, but having that support was, I saw through you starting was huge. But what else do you think it was that helped you have such a strong start? So you burned the ships, you had a supportive, spouse there that was like, yeah, go and attack and go make it happen, and supportive on that side. And what else was it that made you almost rookie of the year that first year, and then the next year like tripling your income? What was it that divided or separated you from the rest of the other agents in that office there?
I remember thinking that I'm just going to keep my head down and keep working and not worry about what other people think of me or what others are doing. And it was a way of focusing, I would say. Like, not to say I wouldn't learn from others, I would ask lots of questions, but I could see that there was an atmosphere in the office and even around town because it was a small town. I was selling real estate in Fergus, and it was a very community oriented environment where you would go on tour to see all the new listings, regardless of whose listing it was or which brokerage it was, and go on these tours every Tuesday and Thursday. So you really got to know your agent community. And I just didn't do the standing around talking about how bad the market was. I didn't care.
Mm,
I just
mm,
knew I needed to pick up the phone. I needed to call people. I didn't know anybody. Because I knew nobody, it was like I already knew nobody. So I
yeah.
had nothing to lose to go and just go and meet new people and ask them what's going on in their lives and how their house is working out for them. And is it all that they've wanted it to be? And, it grows into trust. And that's how I think the ball started to roll because, so just to rewind slightly, I only had moved to Fergus and married Blair 8 months prior. So all I had to go off of was Blair's grandparents' contacts. And I sent out a letter saying, "Hey, I'm the new realtor in town." And all I got out of those 200 letters was one recommendation, which was from my aunt, Auntie Kim, who called her friend who lived 45 minutes away, who was sick and tired of the two realtors that were in that little tiny town. And so then I got my first listing. And so you just get the ball rolling, um, and not being worried about rejection so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, just
At the
math.
same time, though,
Yeah.
I do remember having fear because I remember having my hand on the telephone when I was going to do cold calling. Like this is back. See, I've been in the business now for 22 years. So
Mm,
there's no internet at that time.
yeah.
You had the yellow pages or the white pages. And so
Yeah.
your cold calling steps were you open the phone book and you start on a street and you call up and down the
Mm,
street. And I remember having my hand on the phone and one of my colleagues walks by the office and he says, "It only works if you pick it up, right?"
yeah.
So anyway, I got over that.
Well, you
And
had courage.
then I ended up being in that office, the number one female agent in the town. And that was
Yeah.
after probably 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so fear is something I think that, we all have. I think the biggest difference, like, especially when we first start, right? Fear is a real thing. And what do you think it was that made you have courage? Like courage is you can't have courage unless, there's fear there to start. And so courage is something that taking action regardless of how you feel or the fear that's there, right? And so for you, what do you think it was that actually made you actually take action in, with fear present at that beginning? Like what made you take that action and, move forward?
Conviction.
In what?
I had a presupposition that real estate people were slimy. That's what I thought. And so when I got into it, I thought, I'll be the one who's not like that.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so that was really the only conviction that I had is I'm going to love these guys for what's good for them, and if it's not a good sale or it's not a good time, I'm going to say this is not a good time for you. You don't have to
Mm,
sell, right? Or especially if there was some sort of marital problems and they were feeling pressured to sell, and I would say, is this the right time to be talking about this right now? Maybe you want to get some help together first, and then give them lots of space. I never wanted to come in between that, but that it was about recognizing that people need love, and a sales job is meant not to be forcing something on somebody, but rather helping them to find a way to do the thing that they really did want to do, but they too have fear. And so my job is to help clear the blocks, to help them get there.
Yeah, that that's excellent. And it's like being the bridge. And I think that applies to all businesses really. I mean, whoever you're serving, it's you have like a fiduciary duty to make sure you get an opportunity to show them what you do because you really believe in what it is that you do. Right. And so I think that's like the first step is really believing in yourself that what you're actually doing is a very good thing. Right. And so that's one of the consistent things I see, Stephanie, is with, top producers is that there is something deeper at the beginning that they needed to prove a point. They needed to, you know, they didn't have any more money left in the account. They needed to provide for their family. There's something there that drove them with, like you had said, conviction to overcome that early struggle because it's brutal, right? You have all the existing people that have been in the business before you. They're all around. They're kind of looking at you, and you kind of feel like insignificant, and I'm not making progress. And I mean, it's tough at the beginning. And I know that, like, for all the entrepreneurs listening, it's like it was hard for everybody at the beginning. I think for new people starting off, it's like, oh, they were always successful, right? But there were like, whatever, if it's 5, 10 in your case, over 20 years ago. And I think that's like a really sobering and even maybe even encouraging thought for if you're just starting a business out and it's hard, like that's good. You're on the right path.
Right. And it's good to actually continue to go over that. Even now, we're at the stage in our company where we're bringing on salespeople to come alongside, the business development with what I've been doing. And so to reflect back on how it was when I started and how difficult it was, um, it really drives home the point of, the services that we do have. It makes things much more grabbable, like grasp. You can actually have traction with our team the way that we have things rolling now. Where at the beginning you're just spinning your wheels, but you just keep going, and 3 deals turns into 15, turns into 35, right? Turns into 50. So that's how it goes.
Stephanie, I want to go back a little bit to, how we were brought up because, there was, I think a lot of listeners is like, they're curious as to, the type of environment we were brought up in and what were some of the things that maybe that parents did along the way to be able to say, encourage success. We have a number of family members that have done, really well and, through the years. What do you think that parents did to maybe encourage just being successful and, being able to provide for the family?
I would say there were two things. One was dad took us around whenever he would deliver eggs, right? We would be in the truck and he would drop off boxes of eggs to restaurants. And we would get to talk to the customers coming in and out of the barn, right? We had to learn to go out and sell these guys some eggs if they drove in the driveway. We didn't feel like it. We were in the middle of a show, you know. And then somebody's out there and the workers had gone home for the day. Somebody's got to go out and sell these eggs, right? So I think we learned to just go and do it anyway. It doesn't matter if you feel like it or not. But really just being present, the kitchen table talk, like I said, hearing the business conversations and being able to ask questions, that was great for me personally. I would say dad always encouraged us by
Yeah.
keeping the door open. He never told us you had to do one specific direction.
Yeah.
He would let us lead with whatever it was we found ourselves. Like, my body is not geared for heavy duty sports. But one
Mm.
day I came to him and said, I want to play hockey. Can you imagine? And he was going to let me. He's like, really? You want to play hockey? Okay. And I think I thought of it for another week and I said, nah, I don't really want to. Right?
I didn't know that. I didn't know that you actually asked him at one point. Wow.
All I
Yeah.
wanted was just the sports jacket. I didn't actually
Oh,
want to
right.
play.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
mom, she always gave us encouraging words too. She said, oh, you're so good at whatever. She really encouraged us. So, like, there was a lot of, come on, you guys do better, right? There was a lot of that too, but like every parent. But mom really in particular would say, oh, you're so smart. We really appreciate everything you've done to help, right? And so I think that was the environment.
yeah. No, that for sure. And I think that's something with dad, like even for me, it was like, yeah, whatever you think, Mark, but this is what I think this is a good thing. He'd give some suggestions and whatnot, but he was very, I'd say, like freedom driven in regards to you make your own decisions. And I think he was definitely him and both mom were definitely it was more lead by example than this is how we do it. Like there was less. He would tell stories, but it was less like you need to do this, you need to do that, and more like just lead by example, right?
Yeah, I agree.
In regards to how he operated and how he treated people as well, and both him and mom. I remember whenever he walked into a room, there was always a big smile on his face, and just super curious meeting anyone. I don't know if
Oh, and
if you're
introducing.
yeah.
I would go with him to places and he would bestow so much honor, like, this is my daughter, Stephanie, you know. And man, you want to feel special, right? Your dad introducing you to these people that are to me are strangers. Like, he treated me like I was special, and he does treat mom like she's special, because we are, right? And I'm not saying we as women, I mean whoever he is in the path with, right?
No, for sure. And I think he treated everybody like that as well, right? If he met somebody new, no matter who they were, like, now if he started seeing that there was something that they were, treating them poorly or they were doing something underhanded, like he faced them pretty quick. He would be able to address it or to kind of change the conversation pretty quick or remove himself from that. But just overall, I think like a genuine love of people is where definitely both parents, mom and dad, both they had that growing up and still do. Especially if they walk into a room and they meet somebody, it's like it doesn't matter who they are, they're going to go say hello and I which I think is such a foundational strong principle when it comes to running your business is the fact that we're all dealing with people here, right? And if you have that kind of, well, we'll call it a genuine love of people, right, then you really have like a strong foundation to get into any sort of business at the end of the day. Have you found that helpful for you, like that foundation in your business?
Well, it's a recognition of each person having value. I mean, I I'll go out to, some sort of event, and the serving staff, often you can get that upstairs downstairs vibe going, right, in some sort of event. And I'll make sure to almost befriend the staff because I want them to know that they're fully loved as much as any of these guests who are finely dressed, you know. And it's the same with any member of our team. Like, each person has extreme value. It doesn't matter what their rank or role is within the team. They are fully unique and individual and loved. And I do like them to feel that. And I don't know if they do or not. I'm sure everybody has their points in running a business where somebody's focused on one thing, and you can't always have people feeling good all the time. But um, I think it's just a recognition of each person has value, no matter what their rank or role is.
Yeah, everybody walks around with a sign, that's basically beeping. It's we'll call it, it's flashing, saying love me, appreciate me, care for me, don't ignore me, right? Everybody has that, and I think ultimately, if you can just acknowledge them as being, like you said, I like that, like being unique and special. I think that's something that it starts the conversation off on the right foot, and is a very good foundational piece. D- Do you think, Stephanie, can you share any other stories growing up that you think were relevant, that maybe helped develop you into the person that you are? Are there any other stories that come to mind? Do you remember selling corn at the side of the road, going out and picking the corn and then selling it, and doing the old baker's dozen to all the we were right on a highway, right? So they'd pull over. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I mean, we started when we were in grade 1. I was in grade 1, you were in kindergarten.
It's crazy to think, like, at that age, like our youngest now, he's in grade 7, and it's like, oh, I don't know, like walking down the street, knocking on doors. Like we were down at the highway.
I know, without a parent around, we're just sitting there at the picnic table. Now, I mean, the picnic table wasn't on the shoulder, but it was enough to have a sign up. And yeah, I had to learn how to count money, and it was really just handling people. Like I said, we were used to dealing with customers at least every week, if not every day. So that's one of the inherent realities with having a business at the place that you live. And we got to interact with all kinds of people. I mean, there would be salesmen coming in to sell seed to my to our dad, right? And then there would be a banker, and then there would be an accountant, and there would be mechanics, coming around, and we got to see people in all walks of life. We also lived on the highway where all kinds of walks of life actually hitchhiked back and forth. Dad would bring out a plate of food to somebody who stopped to sit for 5 minutes. So we just lived very out. We didn't live contained. We were very out in the open. And everybody knew, the Faris family with a boatload of kids. So there was some infamy that came with that. I had the luxury of being the oldest, right? So every new child that was on the way, um, I got to say that 9 times, 8 times, right? Oh, I've got a new sibling coming. So
Yeah, no, that selling the corn, that was something that I remember one summer we saved up, and I saved up enough to be able to buy a bike. And I remember this blue and gray bike that I'd purchased. I was so proud of that bike. And I just so happened to leave it behind a car, and that car ended up backing up. I don't know if you remember that, but it ended up bending the frame on that. And I was like, "Oh, my bike!" Right? And so, it was a good lesson on working, accomplishing something, but then making sure you're looking after it as well. But I still remember that bike, but I appreciated it because I worked for it. Right?
I remember that year we made $80 each for the whole summer,
Yeah.
and that bike cost you $50. And I remember you only had $30 left. I kept thinking, you know, so it goes to show you, I had a mind for numbers thinking back then. Well, I was going to say, all of that, I think it contributed to part of where my wrestling came. So I was in Fergus selling residential real estate for 8
Yep.
years, and I had this rumbling inside, like there's something I'm not satisfied with. And I was approaching 30 years old, which is, it's so it seems so small to say, but at that time I felt like I was having a midlife crisis. And it really was that I wasn't sure of the direction that, this career, is it the direction that is great for our lives, our family. Blair and I had our daughter who was 4 years old and our son who was 2. And I just didn't see that the lifestyle that I was living was good for them. And my favorite customers were investors. So anyway, it took a little bit of time of wrestling to decide it's time to jump into the commercial side of real estate. And turns out that I went through that whole approach very similarly to burning the ships as I
Yeah.
did when I left Air Canada, because most people, when they're saying that they want to start doing commercial real estate, they'll say, yeah, I really like it and I want to do it more, but they will not cut off selling houses because they have
Mm,
a stream of income that they're counting on.
right.
But I knew my personality type. I needed to fully focus, otherwise I'd get distracted. And so I literally sold my book of business in Fergus. And Blair and I, we decided to move to Barrie, move closer to the family, back to, be closer to the Faris family and also to his family, which who was living in Lindsay. So in doing that, the the jump off was again very difficult because I was at the highest point in my career in selling residential real estate to a point where flipping over different market, and changing the product type. I had my income, back in Fergus, and then I went to making 10% of that for 3 years in a row. It was such a hard learning curve, but it forced me, and it really did force me to dig in and decide, is this what I really want to do? You know? And again, I had a moment of real deep reflection, and I remember praying, and the benefit with reading the Bible is that you have Bible verses pop up at just the right moment. And this one Bible verse came up in my soul, and the verse was, discipline hurts for a little while, and then it yields a peaceable fruit of righteousness for those who stay in it. And so that, at the moment that I was feeling like I was going to quit and maybe just quit real estate altogether, because I thought maybe I was being a bad mom and that I shouldn't work and I should be a stay-at-home mom, which being a stay-at-home mom is a very beautiful endeavor. That's a beautiful thing. But the logic that if I were to go into it, it
Mm,
wasn't the right fit. And I think that I knew to keep going based on
yeah.
hearing, that verse. It just clicked in my soul, and I knew, like, okay, I got to keep going. And the next year, I was back to, the kind of income that I had been used to producing, and then, growing from there. It wasn't about the income so much, but learning how to speak to investors, to give them the information that they needed to make better decisions. And I hadn't really clicked all of that together yet. You gather information, but when you start making synapse connections, it makes all the difference in your ability to really serve others.
Yeah. Well, getting that encouragement there from the Bible just at the time when you're about to quit is like as powerful. And that it's a pretty consistent theme that I've seen and identified with a lot of entrepreneurs is like that's a lot of times that's like the story is I was about to give up, and I just, I took a couple of extra steps, which is so rare because most people do give up at that point. um, and you got amazing encouragement that's at that step. But generally, at the worst time, that is the time that is we'll say, based on history and based on most successful people, they said that that was the moment that they like found almost like their other self and they pushed through. And then it was just like, boom, something connected. And most people do give up, right? But if you can just keep moving forward there. So, that encouragement that you found at that point was really important. And so that for the listeners out there, if you are going through some major challenge, is like wherever you can find encouragement, whether it's the Bible or a friend or a mentor. Stephanie, like any encouragement there for maybe the listeners that are, because there's a lot of businesses today that are, they're struggling. And so, what would you say for some sort of like encouragement for them to, and maybe it's not even the right move to move forward as well. I think that's another alternative. You might need to go down another pathway, but the key is to not stop, right? You got to keep taking action towards something. What are your thoughts with that stuff?
I keep thinking about that conviction, right? Like there really needs to be something that you see is better for the person for whom you're serving by you doing it. I mean, if there's some sort of gap in the marketplace, something that hasn't yet come to be, you have something really important to it's a mission to get it into somebody's hands because it's so important. And if you it's very easy to get your eyes off of that. So that's why it's good. It's, when people talk about your vision mission, when you write it down, it's so that you don't forget. It's because it's just the human way. We tend to forget. The history is littered with people with forgetting who they really are and what's important. And I think that helping it does massively help to bring people into that vision. And if there's conflict about that, then they're not the right fit because they don't see the vision. I mean, there obviously, if you're losing money hand over fist and it's just a bad idea, right? I heard this before. You need to have a market, and there needs to be available money for that market, and there needs to be a lot of people who need that, right? Or if you're going to choose a boutique aspect, make sure that there's a lot of depth of money or depth of market for that service. But as long as the vision is real, and if there's conflict, if you're partnering with the wrong people,
Yeah.
then you'll lose track of that vision. So it's important it's the vision that has to be set, and people follow that, and then you can make progress that way.
Yeah. No, that's really great. Can you describe what the business looks like today, Stephanie, for the listeners?
So Maven Commercial Real Estate specifically focuses on serving investors and business owners with their investment decisions. So we've got clients that are operating their companies. They need industrial warehouse facilities, office buildings, retail shopping plazas. We also have investors that buy apartment buildings, seniors' homes, and we really help to give pension level and trust fund, like real estate trust, investment trusts, level analysis for private equity and high net worth individuals that may not have that that in-house real estate person. So we're providing that level of insight into their decisions, so that into their information, so they can make better decisions.
So you're working with an investor. They have funds that they're looking to invest. What investment advice would you give, say, even, so your clients or even like the listeners that, we're looking to invest, what investment advice would you give them at a high level?
There's a lot of questions. I could not just dole out advice right away because everybody has a specific reason why they're choosing to invest. They may have like a special skill set that they can find themselves be able to use. And so that's really important. If they have no ability to look after an investment, then it's going to tailor the type of investment that we would recommend. But we ask a lot of questions before making any recommendations. I mean, obviously, you always have to look at what is going to perform the best. All things being equal, what's going to give a better return? What's the level of risk? Could the bottom come out of whatever that investment is? How much work do you have to do to support that investment? Is it is it a long-term play, a short-term play? Do you have other investments that you're trying to time? You know, do you have children that are coming into the business with you, or coming into some estate planning decisions that you have to make, that it will make a very big difference with what you choose? Who are the professionals that you have surrounding you that can support you in this? There are so many questions that we would ask to make sure it's a good fit, because a lot of people like real estate. A lot of people get angry at real estate or the market,
Yeah.
or some tenant or whatever. At the end of it all, nothing is easy, and it's all what you want to pay attention to.
Yeah. No, that's great. And for sure, there's not one size fits all. It's about, yeah, what is important and what are their goals moving forward. And it makes a lot of sense. Now we're starting 2025. So we'll say, real estate, stocks. Are there any types of real estate that you think that there's an opportunity in general right now, when you're looking at overall, risk profile versus overall projected returns? Is there any sort of, we'll just say, opportunity zone that you're seeing out there?
Okay, so if we're talking in Canada, right? I think there is one thing that Canada has that a lot of places don't, like the US, it doesn't have as much, and that is cold weather. So, with the benefit of that cold weather, I think that there's going to be an influx of data centers that will be built in Canada. And the reason you need the data centers is to accommodate all of the AI computing that's about to happen. So again, if you're looking for areas that are likely to experience any kind of growth, anything that's into creation of power, anything that is into storing of power or storing of data, that's an area that is going to grow significantly. And then the growth surrounding the locations that are going to experience that, industry, is going to also be geographically oriented. So I think that it matters where those jobs are going to go towards. The reality is also that I'm very bullish on secondary and tertiary markets around Toronto. The reality is that the work from home flexible environment is likely to stay, as much as the companies are looking to have that culture be restored. It's hard to get that horse back into the barn.
Yeah.
I think that you're going to still have 3-day a week work weeks in the office, but there will be those 2 days of flexibility, which means you're going to have a lot of the homeowners are going to stay put with wherever they move to after COVID. And so they still need services if they're living there. And, I think that the growth of areas around Toronto are going to continue to thrive. And it typically is that you have the immigration population moving into the center of Toronto, and then those that have lived in Toronto, they tend to move out. Well, now the immigration and the families that have been tied in that formerly would be very comfortable staying in Toronto, they have roots on the periphery now. So it's not going to be certain types of people anymore. I think we're a full metropolitan environment in the secondary and tertiary places. So Barrie being, I would call, a secondary market. Orillia and Alliston, Bradford, Innisfil, those are, we would call that tertiary, but it's all very close to Toronto. So I think that those areas are going to continue to thrive.
Great advice, great insights there for sure. All right, Stephanie, we are coming to wrapping up, but we do have the rapid fire part of the conversation. You ready for the last 3 questions here?
Sure.
All right. So, Stephanie, I have known you since, we'll just say over 40 years now. And I don't know what your favorite book is. What's your favorite book that's made the biggest impact in your life?
Well, I mentioned them both. So the Bible is my number one. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad was the one that opened my eyes to the real estate world. So I'm going to give it the credit. I still think back into its principles, debt is good, that's one of those counterintuitive thoughts, but obviously it's tied to assets, asset rich debt.
No, I tell the boys on a regular basis, or I ask them the question, what's an asset? They're like, something that puts money in your pocket. What's a liability? Something that takes money out of your pocket. I'm like, good job. Right. And that's all from Robert Kiyosaki in his book. And, the other thing that I took from that book as well, which was actually one of my intro books into real estate, is the fact that cash flow, buy for cash flow. And so that's where when you sit over the last few years, as interest rates have doubled and you've seen a lot of operators get hurt, like I've seen a lot firsthand. And the reality is that if you buy a property that's already cash flowing from day one, man, like it is much more resilient than, something that's not. And so those are like my big two takeaways. What would you say? Were any of those? What was your biggest takeaway that you'd say from that book that like really hit home for you that you think changed the way that you look at real estate?
Well, to look at real estate, for me, it was looking at the quadrant. There's an employee, a self-employed person, a business owner, an investor. And for me, I decided I was going to be on that right quadrant. So business owner and investor. That was for me the big foundational decision that came from that book. The love of real estate, that was easy. I already felt it innately, right? It's physical, it's tangible. You can't mess with it, you can't print it. Land there's a finite land, as Mark Twain says. They ain't making dirt anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like doubles pretty much every 10 years, right? That's a pretty good spot, and you can leverage it too, right?
So I just want to say this. I read a poem that was about a man in the 1920s, very sad that he hadn't invested in New York real estate in Manhattan, saying that the price was ridiculously high. And he was comparing to back when the Europeans first came over and how they could buy the entire Manhattan island for a certain dollar. And anyway, it's this poem written back then. So I actually went and looked at the New York City Library how much a parcel of land was back then, because they have the records. And I did the math, I extrapolated it out. At that time, 1 acre of land was $60,000 an acre.
In today's dollar.
But it was $60,000 then.
Got it.
And I went to MLS to see how much half an acre was.
Yeah.
And it was $60 million. And I bring that up to say, you really cannot go wrong with your real estate so long as you are not forced to sell it. And I would also preface that to say, real estate is only a tool for you to grow wealth. As soon as that tool isn't working for you anymore, you could do something else and invest in something that will give you better benefits. But all to say, if you can't go wrong holding real estate.
Yeah, definitely wise counsel there. All right, second question is, what are 3 words that would best describe you?
I asked my daughter this, and also Blair. They both said the same words. Determined, intelligent or smart is what they said, and honest.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think I'm qualified to be able to agree to that or not. I've been around you for a few years growing up, right? And
I would have said curious instead of the intelligent one, but because I like to ask a lot of questions.
Well, we'll give you 4 there. You got curious as well. Very good. All right, and last question: what advice would you give an entrepreneur that's listening today?
I would actually help them to slow down and look at who they're partnering with. A lot of people confuse having the same goal with having the same values. They're not the same. You can have the same goal, and how you get to whatever the destination looks very different with between partners. And it's really critical that you have the same values and the same goals. And you can't, like, and just to put it the other way, you may have the same values. There may be people in your world that you have the same values, but if you don't have the same goal, either timing or stage of life or, drive, that's a mismatch too. So just because you have the same values does not mean you have the same goals. And so it's really critical to separate those two and ensure that your partners are on the same footing on both.
So good. Yeah. And for those of you that have partnered in the past, you could probably nod your head to yes, that's really good insight to be able to get that up front before you start going into partnership with anyone. So very good, Stephanie. Well, how can the listeners, if they want to reach out to you and connect, what's the best way they can reach out to you?
You can't go wrong going to our website, mavencommercial.ca, Maven. And we're also on all the socials. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. So connect with us that way too. Phone, I'm an old school person at heart. So dial the number you see on the website and we'll be happy to have a personal conversation.
Right on. What's your number, Steph?
705-728-9000.
All right, guys. Any commercial real estate, you give Stephanie a call. Thanks again, sis, for the time coming on, and I'm sure we'll run into each other at our next family outing together.
Yeah, sounds good, Mark.
Very cool.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for having me too.
Yeah, no, this is great. We got to share some good stories there. And for those of you that are listening, thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, please subscribe and share with others. And just remember, the fastest way to build wealth is to grow your business and invest in real estate. I love you guys.